Doffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live, of course, as well on the free Odyssey app and streaming on YouTube at the Team 980. And joining us now is an Emmy Award-winning director. Her new film, Full Court Press, available in 4 parts on ESPN Plus. It chronicles Caitlyn Clark, Kiki Rice, and Kamilla Cardoso along the 2023-24 college basketball season. It's Kristen Lappas. Kristen, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is fun.
I'm excited to have you. I was telling you as we were corresponding before having you on, like my wife and I binge watched this. It's such an amazing film. And I have to just ask to start, like everyone that's a documentary filmmaker in the sports space probably wanted to chronicle Caitlyn Clark in 2023. How did you convince her that you were the right team to do it, you and your crew?
Yeah, I mean, it is very true. She was the most sought after athlete on the planet. I feel like the last 6 months. What's really interesting about this project is it was a partnership between the company that I work for, Words and Pictures, and then Omaha Productions, which was founded by Peyton Manning. And Peyton and Caitlyn actually developed a friendship over the course of the last college basketball season. He just reached out to her and was like, hey, I've played in big time pressure situations. I'm a huge fan of you and what you're doing for the game. He was a huge women's basketball person, dating back to like when he was at Tennessee. Right. He had a really good relationship with Pat Summitt. Anyway, so, that relationship between the two of them really sparked this thing. He pitched her as like, hey, I'm coming off of, this show on Netflix called Quarterback. We want to try to figure something out and do this for women's basketball. Would you be interested? And then at that point, after she had committed, Kamilla and Kiki had not been approached yet. He came to me and the company I work for, Words and Pictures, and my boss, Connor Schell, and was like, hey, I think we should team up on this. I've covered women's sports for a long time in documentary films. And so he felt like I was the right storyteller to do this with him. So I'm grateful, eternally grateful that he, trusted myself and our team. And it was like a dream assignment, honestly.
Yeah. And for those that don't know, Connor Schell is, as much as anybody, the brains behind 30 for 30 back in the day at ESPN, incredibly well-regarded executive. Now, obviously working, as you said, with Words and Pictures. So as you convince Caitlyn and then Kamilla and Kiki to do this, how cognizant are you as a filmmaker that these are extremely young people, that it's different than, covering a grown adult 28, 29, 30-year-old athlete, or certainly someone who's retired? Like these are 22, or in Kiki's case, she might have been 19 when you guys started doing this filming. How cognizant are you of that fact, and how does it change, if at all, what you're doing?
Very cognizant of it. I made sure to bring that up in our initial production meetings with Omaha and Words and Pictures that, hey, listen, I want to make sure that we're, Quarterback was an amazing show. This is going to be different. These women are still trying to figure it out. They're still, college students that have a very different situation, a very different, type of stress in their lives. They're not living in their mansions with their wives. It's just the nature of the show is different. I wanted to make sure that people understood that going in, and it wasn't like we were trying to do exactly what Quarterback did. But I think there's something really special about documenting college women at this stage in their lives. I think they're really authentic. They're fresh. They're not jaded by cameras and the media. They were really excited to participate in this. And I think that they let us in a way that, I've done, the last project I worked on was Giannis Antetokounmpo, a documentary on him. And, sometimes when you are trying to capture, the everyday scenes with those like larger than life superstars that have been doing this for a long time, there are a lot of levels and layers of people that you have to get through in order to like get the access with that athlete. Whereas like with Caitlyn, Kiki, and Kamilla, it was really just myself and our 3 field producers who I have to credit. I can't be in 3 places at all times.
Sure.
The edit was happening simultaneously to the shooting. And so we had Hannah Beer, Susie Beck, and Adrian Gallagher, 3 female producers that were embedded with the 3 women throughout the season. And it was really just like a text conversation between those 3 women and Caitlyn, Kamilla, and Kiki. Hey, what are you doing this week? What are we allowed to be there for? And so anyways, the approach was very different. I think it's refreshing. I think it's authentic, And I hope, people are seeing that and that's coming through in the film.
So do you feel a sense of like that you need to protect them at all? Because I'd imagine there's got to be at least some like human element of that, but also balancing like, no, this is journalism, this is a documentary. Like the whole goal is the access and to show people. So like, how did you as a human being like balance those competing probably at times feelings?
Yeah, I mean, you always feel that when you're making a film, right? You're trying to be true to the story, but also, like you said, you're a human being and you spend a lot of time with these people and you develop a relationship with them. And so it was really important for me to always be overly communicative with them, to try to just explain like what we were trying to do. For example, Caitlyn in the locker room after the Nebraska loss, she kind of loses her temper, very uncharacteristic of her to like, throw something. She knew the cameras were there. And, I just tried to explain to her that me personally, I think audiences really connect with scenes like that because we've all had those bad days. And if you just kind of like curate only and you only show the good times and the happy times, that's just not real life. And people don't connect as much with that. So I just tried to explain to them that like allowing fans and audiences to see, the highs, the lows, their flaws, is really important when you're making an authentic documentary. And they all bought in, honestly. And we didn't hold back on anything really.
Kristen Lappas, the documentary is Full Court Press. It's available now on ESPN Plus with us here on the Hoffman Show. So I'm so curious, and hopefully the audience finds this interesting too, but I've always been so interested in this as like a media person. The process of a documentary, and obviously you said this one's pretty different. It's put out so quickly after the season ends. Like the edit is happening simultaneously, which I didn't know before I was talking to you, but I probably could have guessed now as I think about the timeline. Like that's nuts that you guys got all this done so quickly. So what is the process like of capturing, sorting through the footage, editing, deciding kind of the storyboard of how it all is going to come together? Like what's that process like in as much detail as you want to give? Also, we're considering you could probably talk about this for 2 hours and we're doing a 20-minute interview.
Yeah, I could definitely nerd out on this topic for 2 hours for sure, but I'll try to keep it quick.
Maybe we'll have you back another time to do that one.
So first and foremost, doing a show of this magnitude, of this length, and making sure that it still feels elevated and cinematic and the storytelling is up to the standards that personally I have, but also Words and Pictures, Omaha, and ESPN have. It was a lot of pressure. We first and foremost needed to make sure that we had the right team in place. So I'm sure a lot of people don't know this, but that there were 30 people living and breathing this story for the past 6 months. It wasn't just me and this small team of people. Like we had 5 editors, we had 4 producers in the field with these women. We had story producers that were sorting through footage, associate producers, production assistants, the list can go on and on and on and on. When this, we're filming 28 days with these women, probably 6 hours a day. So when you do the math, that's a lot of footage to sort through. And I tell everybody this, and it's funny, it's like, how were you there for that moment? It's so crazy. And the answer is that not every day is exciting and not every shoot day ends up making the final show. You have to be around for a lot of days in order to, block out and be there for the right moments. And so, I'm going to give some credit to the associate producers, Riley Bloom and Porter Dickey. They literally spent the last 6 months with headphones on in an edit bay, just sorting through and watching every single frame of footage that we shot. And then they would meet with myself and the story producers, and they would say like, hey, listen, this moment's really good. Or Dawn Staley had this awesome like Nat in practice that we think could go here. And so I have a storyboard and an outline of the entire series, which is constantly ebbing and flowing and changing. And as I'm getting that information from them, I'm adjusting and moving things around. But the truth of the matter is like, when you do a retrospective film, I actually find the story process much, much easier because you're able to kind of map out, like you already know what the beginning, the middle, and the end are. For this, it's constantly changing. Like we started the season and Dawn Staley told me, I don't think we're going to be very good this year. Like, we lost all of our starters, and then they end up having a perfect season and winning a national championship. So constantly, like, I wish that you could see the big story map that we had, because it's like, all the pieces are constantly moving around. And it is like a big puzzle, and you hope you get it right in the end. And when the light bulb finally goes off and you feel like you have the right structure, it's like a really rewarding feeling. I would argue that's the best kind of the high for me, is like when it's all clicking in the edit, as opposed to like it coming out for the world to see. That experience is way cooler for me.
Now we just have a new idea for a documentary about the documentary, including a time lapse of the storyboard over the course of months. Kristen Lappas with us here on the Hoffman Show. So I want to dive into the players themselves real quick. As you meet with Caitlyn and you watch her year unfold, what stood out to you about her, and did anything change with her? Because there's this moment in the doc where she says, like, I don't feel like I've changed. Like, this is what I'm meant to be. But as an observer, like, did you see anything change with her throughout the year?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that her values, her morals, what's important to her, basketball, family, her teammates, winning over anything else, like, none of those things changed, which I really appreciate, because let's be honest, for a 22-year-old to receive the type of attention and the media coverage that she received over the last 6 months, like, I don't know how I would have acted or changed, because of that. And I give her a lot of credit. She's one of the most poised and mature 22-year-olds I've ever met. And she did stay true to those things. But of course it does change you in small ways, she said in our series, like, sometimes you just want to be a normal kid. And she got to the point where she literally could not leave her dorm or the practice facility without being, like, hounded by dozens of fans. Like, even in New York City, right? Like, you'd think, oh, she can go about her business in New York City. We were filming with her and people were stopping her. She's on the big, Jumbotron, a picture of her, and she's posing in front of it. So life just is never going to be normal for her. But I think she handled it really, really well. And I will say this. So we interviewed her twice, like in the big master sit down interviews that are usually between 2 and 3 hours, once in January, and then again after the draft in April. And I did notice that she was a little more confident. She wasn't holding back as much. I think some of the sound was like really revealing. I was like, okay. She was, the selection committee kind of did us dirty. And she told the Geno story about how he didn't recruit her. So some things that I felt like maybe she was holding back and being a little more reserved in that first interview. I felt like she finally, had that a little more swag about her and was a little more forthcoming in that interview.
Yeah, I will also say this as someone who's been like, so Alicia, as the audience knows at this point, like, Alicia Clark is a very good friend of mine. We've known each other since we were both at Middle Tennessee State, at this point, far too many years ago. But Alicia's, so like when we go out with Alicia in public, we are fine because she's 5'10". And like, that's just short enough to blend in. But like, if you're Caitlyn Clark and you're 6 feet tall and you're walking certainly through Des Moines, Iowa, nevertheless in New York City, like, there is just a like, oh, who's that athletic looking, very tall person? Oh my God, that's Caitlyn Clark. There's just not that many people it can be. And so I can imagine you add your cameras and the swaths of people around her naturally, like, that's gotta be overwhelming. And I actually ask, like, did you ever feel bad having the camera there, be like, oh, maybe she could have slipped through, but this camera, I don't know what kind of cameras you're using. Maybe you're using little, Sony or whatever brand DSLRs that are now super high quality. It's not like you're necessarily walking with a giant film camera at all times, but like, are you ever like, oh, maybe we're not helping her blend in here?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I will say this, that our philosophy as a team was, we have a very small footprint when we do these production. Like, it's not a commercial shoot. There aren't 15 people and lights and this and that. Like, that's not really how we operate, because we want to make sure that we are letting them kind of live as natural and normal of a life as possible. So it was really just one producer, a camera, and an audio person for the most part. And I do think that, like, having that really small footprint helped, and honestly just helped get better footage, better scenes. Coach Bluter was, for example, a little bit reserved and, intimidated by allowing cameras into, like, the most sacred spaces of their program, right? Like, my dad was a college coach for 25 years. Like, I know that how big of an ask that is. But I think once she saw that, like, it wasn't going to be a distraction, like, our camera would kind of slip into the back of the locker room, our audio person would stand outside the locker room so they weren't in there. I think they started to become a little more comfortable with us being there.
Gotcha. Kristen Lappas with us for another minute or two here on the Hoffman Show. I have to ask you about Kiki, as obviously we're here in DC. She grew up here. Her aunt is Susan Rice. I actually didn't know that. I'd known about Kiki for a while. I didn't realize that Susan Rice, the former Obama administrator, cabinet member, is her aunt. Her parents, highly accomplished professionals. She went to Sidwell and Friends. Like, it's an intense family in that way, but you also show some scenes where they're having fun playing ping pong. Like, her dad and her are laughing a lot in the film. I'm curious if that intensity, though, shaped her in any ways that you found like profound, and how their attempts to balance out that intensity kind of created what we now see as Kiki Rice, amazing athlete.
Yeah, I do think that the way that she grew up in like an elite political family, she also had like a ton of relatives that had played professionally. Her dad played at Yale, really smart family, just impressive across the board. I think that it allowed for her to not feel the pressure as much as maybe the average kid that didn't grow up with spotlights on her family, so to speak. Like, she saw her aunt in the media, in the public facing, in a public facing role for so many years, that for her, she kind of just has this very quiet confidence about her, where it's like, she's reserved and she's not like the most gregarious person, but she's like, the cameras, the spotlight, it doesn't really faze me, which I think is going to really bode well for her as her career continues. Like, I don't think that any platform or stage or game is like too much for her. Like, I don't think the pressure is going to break her because of the way that she grew up. But also, like, they're a really competitive family. They have high expectations. And I do think that's in the back of her head when your parents expect you to be not only, great on the basketball court, but like a really upstanding, like, student and leader. I think that's where she feels a little bit more pressure. And I think that, like, a scene that I really fought for that Kiki at first wasn't as comfortable with, and then once she, kind of understood what we were doing, was the therapist scene.
Yeah, that was
I think that was really feeling, right? Like, people don't get to see an athlete working with a sports psychologist and kind of how they feel and the pressures that they are facing on a day-to-day basis. So I really appreciate her allowing us in for that moment.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a quote, I think it's from the sports psychologist. My buddy, Wes Dunning, trained her at Healthy Baller here in DC. So shout out to Wes. But there's a reference to something that I presume is Wes. Maybe it's another trainer that Kiki worked with, saying like, what should I know about her? And it's like, she's not quite as confident as you would think, considering how good she is. It's a really magical scene. So I'm glad that you guys were able to get that in. I have time for one more question, so I'm gonna just go for it, Kristen. There's a bunch of stories that emerged yesterday about season 2, and the potential to do this again next year. Obviously, Paige Becker's name comes up. Kiki's back for another year. What can you tell us, if anything, about the potential for a sequel here?
As much as I would love there to be a second season, and it feels like a no-brainer to me, nothing is official yet. I don't know who leaked that, but I do know that Brian Lockhart, who runs ESPN Original Programming, is a close mentor and friend of mine. I worked for him for a bunch of years at ESPN, and I know he was really, really happy with the overall product of this. And he's a huge supporter of women's basketball, so I feel confident, but nothing set in stone yet.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Kristen, this was great. We'll have to, at some point when you're not doing a full-on media tour for a film you've just released, would love to have you back and talk more about the documentary process. This was really great. Thanks so much for joining us here on The Hoffman Show.
Oh my gosh, this was so much fun. Thank you for having me.
Hey, this is DA, and you're listening to The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.